Hello and welcome to another episode of NewsX Deep Dive with me, Uday Pratap Singh. Today we are turning our attention to Johannesburg, South Africa, where world leaders have converged for the 20th meeting of the G20. The historic summit is the first G20 to take place on the African continent with the theme Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability, reflecting the key issues driving the global community and its leaders. While prominent figures including Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen and more were in attendance. Some notable non-participants included the United States, with President Trump boycotting the event and refusing to send a representative. Argentinian President Javier Milei also joined the boycott, although he sent his foreign minister as his substitute. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin also chose to send representatives rather than attend the event themselves. The summit, however, has progressed with many major headways being presented. Prime Minister Narendra Modi pitched for India's vision for 6 new G20-led initiatives, highlighting India's vision for an inclusive and multilateral world with a strong anti-terror stance. So what were the 6 proposals made by India at the G20? Well, let's dive in. A major focus of India is the G20 initiative on countering the drug-terror nexus. The proposal calls for an urgent and coordinated action to overcome the challenge of drug trafficking. The Prime Minister affirmed that the creation of this initiative would help break the drug-terror economy, warning of the spread of extremely dangerous substances like fentanyl. India has called for coordinated action to weaken the wretched drug-terror economy. The second proposal pitched by India was focused on creating a G20 global healthcare response team with trained medical professionals from member countries ready for deployment. This, the Prime Minister stressed, would help countries respond quickly to emergencies. We are stronger when we work together in the face of health emergencies and natural disasters, PM Modi asserted as he urged the creation of multinational teams of trained experts ready for deployment. In a push for host country Africa's development, India also proposed the G20 Africa Skills Multiply initiative to facilitate the country's workforce transformation. Highlighting Africa's growing role in global governance, Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed Africa's progress is vital for global progress. The initiative aims at producing 1 million certified in Africa over the next decade. India's fourth proposal was the establishment of a global traditional knowledge repository. The Prime Minister noted that India has rich history in this regard, saying that such a platform would allow member nations to share inherited knowledge systems that support good health and well-being. India, Prime Minister Modi asserted, was putting forward a few actionables as well to realize our dream of all-round growth. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also announced a G20 open satellite data partnership to make satellite data more accessible to countries of the global south, underscoring India's drive to become a voice for the region and present their perspectives on a global stage. Finally, India called for the creation of a G20 critical minerals circulatory initiative. The key proposal aims to advance recycling, urban mining and second life batteries. This, Prime Minister Modi stressed, would reduce reliance on primary mining and ease supply chain pressures. The initiative also calls for support for joint research, global standards and pilot recycling facilities in the global south, reiterating one of the cornerstones of the G20 Summit 2025 sustainability. Let's in fact listen in to Prime Minister's push for comprehensive global strategies that link nutrition, public health, sustainable agriculture and disaster preparedness.
अब हमें इन प्रिंसिपल्स पर आगे बढ़ते हुए एक G20 रोड मैप बनाना चाहिए. फ्रेंड्स, resilience cannot build in silos. G20 को ऐसी कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव स्ट्रेटेजी को बढ़ावा देना चाहिए जो न्यूट्रिशन, पब्लिक हेल्थ, सस्टेनेबल एग्रीकल्चर और डिजास्टर प्रिपेयर्डनेस को जोड़कर एक मजबूत वैश्विक सुरक्षा बनाए.
The G20 summit also adopted a declaration on its first day to address the climate crisis and other global challenges. The declaration was drafted without any inputs from the White House due to the United States boycotting the event. Special emphasis was placed on the creation of a G20 critical minerals framework with the objective to use critical minerals as a catalyst for sustainable development and inclusive economic growth. The framework further seeks to ensure that the countries producing these minerals, especially in the global south, can derive maximum benefit from their resources. India's priorities also shine through, with the declaration unequivocally condemning terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, reflecting India's consistent stance on the issue. India successfully ensured that key outcomes of its 2023 G20 presidency continue to resonate strongly in the leaders' declaration adopted at the G20 summit in South Africa. while amplifying the voice and priorities of the global south. And joining us now to discuss the G20 in South Africa is Ambassador Bhashwati Mukherjee, former diplomat. Ambassador Mukherjee, what did you make of India's assertions at the G20 in South Africa? Prime Minister Modi making a pitch for several crucial issues. Your first response.
Thank you, Uday. It was indeed gratifying to see that our Prime Minister, having first gotten the African Union as a member of the G20, if you recall, in our own New Delhi G20 Summit, has now pushed forward initiatives which are vital to the G20 and in particular to the Global South, thereby reiterating the position of India as a natural leader of the Global South. And for that, I would cite what you've just mentioned, which is, for instance, on traditional knowledge, for instance, on the global healthcare, when we recall, Uday, how India, when it was short of vaccines, generously shared its vaccines during the COVID pandemic with the African continent, while the developed countries who had access just stored them for their own population and did not share. So these kind of G20 initiatives are of crucial value, and I would in particular cite the last two which you mentioned. The first is, of course, on critical minerals exchange, which is of a critical issue for developing countries, and the satellite data partnership. These two are of particular importance, quite apart from the initiative on the anti-terror and drug network. It is unfortunate that the US President boycotted the summit. It would be interesting to see how the baton is then passed on after the summit from South Africa to USA. But one was heartened to hear that there were other important Western countries who were represented at the level of heads of state and government, because their support is also crucial in taking forward the initiatives which have been submitted to the G20 leadership by our Prime Minister at this summit. Uday.
Yes, Ambassador Mukherjee, also, do you believe some of the boycotts, including by the President of the United States of America and the non-attendance of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping personally, overshadowed the G20 summit? Or do you believe, the constructive dialogue that has happened in Johannesburg, and also the fact that a declaration was adopted despite the US not being there, was something that would define the G20 in South Africa?
It would define the G20 in South Africa. And in fact, I wonder if President Trump's advisors are aware that since US is the president designate, it would have been much more useful to have a strong American presence who could put in their ideas into this declaration, which would be easier then for the US to carry it forward at the next summit, which would be in USA. So their absence actually is their loss, not the loss of the G20, because they may have had very valuable ideas to contribute, for instance, to many of the initiatives of our Prime Minister, which have not been included because of their absence. As far as Xi Jinping and the Russian president is concerned, yes, indeed, their presence would have been invaluable. It's not clear exactly why they decided to send high-level representatives instead of coming themselves, but certainly it does provide a challenge, because both are very powerful countries and both have positions on each of these issues, including, for instance, the one on critical mineral network. So that their absence is unfortunate, but it does not in any way take away the importance of the summit, which in any case, its declaration and its actionable points would be then handed over to the next chairperson designate on 1st of January, which is the United States. And the United States would then have to deal with a declaration in which they had no role to play in drafting it. So that's why I said that the loss is that of United States, not of the G20. The G20 was not undermined by their absence, but they could have strengthened the document or added initiatives of their own had they been present to put forward their perspective. The same applies to a lesser extent to the Russian Federation and China, because they did send high-level representatives, but they were not represented at the level of heads of state or government. One is not exactly sure why. There must be reasons,
Yes.
including, for instance, in the case of President Putin, about what position the G20 would take on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. I haven't seen any reference to it. There must be a reference. It would be interesting to see what kind of reference there is on the Russia-Ukraine conflict in the G20. In New Delhi, we had a consensus paragraph on this issue in the New Delhi G20.
Yes. Yes. All right. Ambassador Mukherjee, appreciate you joining us with your perspective on this segment.